But imagine if you didn't know a child had an allergy, you know?
Yes, and when we present issues to parents, we want to make sure that it comes from a place of we've observed, we've seen, we've heard directly from the child. Training yourself as a teacher to think of everything as a cause and effect.
So now we want to talk on some policies and procedures, because a lot of schools have different policies and procedures, which is crazy to me because I feel like all of them should have almost the same policies and procedures.
And you would think that licensing would have a set guideline for it, but they really don't. It's very loose.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about what we think. And
one of the hot topics on this would be fever. That is a strange practice among different preschools, because some say, oh, it's okay if it's just a little mild fever and we know they're teething, then we don't need to send them home. Where others say, as soon as it hits 100, you have to call and they need to come and pick up that within 1 hour.
Yeah, I feel like it's always hard when it's like when the children are teething, because when I was like in the infant and toddler room, like the parents would just say, oh, they're teething, but then I'm like, I get they're like teething, but at the same time I'm like, but then they come up and then they're sick. You could tell that they're sick, or like they're getting other people sick, and it's just like, so should they get sent home? So that's like a big topic. Like, when do they get sent home?
And really the question is, are they able to function in the classroom? And that should be written in the policy is, are they flush? Are they interacting? Are they sneezing, runny nose? And, you know, sometimes they are so sick. I've seen one child fall asleep outside in the playground. I'm like, she should not have been there. She needs rest. She should be home. Sure enough, she had a fever.
And the playground, everyone loves the playground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I knew something was up because this is one of those girls that is usually running around. And she was in the book center, and then all of a sudden she went to sleep. And I checked her temperature. Sure enough, it went to 102. But it was not like that in the morning. So the parent had to have given her medicine, so she was regular up until that point, right before nap time, because we go outside right before nap time. And she couldn't hang. She was sleepy. She fell right to sleep, and that was not like that child. So she definitely was feeling sick. We had to call the parents and send them home.
I know, and that's crazy because right now a lot of children are getting sick because of this is the season. Mm-hmm. But I did have a child that was kind of like a little bit off one day, and we're like, oh, it seems like he might have a fever, I don't know. Later they checked his temperature, it was like very light, but then they kept him home 2 days. They brought him, and then I asked the parent, I was like, oh, like how is he doing? Mm-hmm. Goes, oh, he's fine, he was running around, he was fine. And I was like, oh, he didn't catch a fever or anything? And then she's like, no, he was fine.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, because I'm like, oh, I know a lot of the children have been like getting like fevers and things like that. So, and she's like, no, he was fine. He's been running around. He's ready to come back. And I was like, okay. And so he came in, and come to find out, he was not wanting to play at all. He kept saying, I'm tired. He did not look good. He came in the classroom with his backpack just like slouching, and he just kind of like pale face and a little bit like baggy under eyes. It was a little red, and I was like, oh, he don't look good still, you know. And he comes in, and he kept telling us the whole time, I'm tired. I was like, okay, go ahead and lay down, because we have like this cozy area where it's like there's like little pillows and things like that. So I said, oh, go lay down over there. He did, and he fell asleep.
Aww.
And he is one of our most active kids. And so we're like, there's something wrong. Like, no, like he was asleep for like 2 hours. And we called mom. We were like, you know, and after she picked up, or like, yeah, she picked him up, and she's like, oh, that's weird. It was fine. But you know what she said?
What'd she say?
She said, now I can't do no rapping.
Oh, what a shame. Oh my goodness gracious.
That's what I was like, oh, which I understand. Like, it's hard with the children and you're trying to wrap and things like that. But that's what's so hard. It's like, your child is sick. And you just were bringing your child because you knew and, like, you just needed that time.
Yeah. See, that's really heartbreaking for us as teachers to see that kind of a thing, because we can see that the child needs to be home. They just want to be tucked inside, and a lot of times they want one-on-one, and we can't give them one-on-one when they're feeling sick, and we feel bad. One reason is because the closer we are to them, the more likely we are to get the illness. But two, we've got a lot of kids that need our attention, and we can't have a child that clingy to us.
Yeah. And then we still have to follow a schedule.
Yes.
You know, like, even my playground that we go out to, we have to, our playground that we use is, like, on the other side of the school.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, let's say we're going to the side of school, who's going to stay in the classroom with that child that's sleeping? You know, we still have to follow a schedule, and if they're not feeling good, like, there's been times when a child's been thrown up at the playground. It's like, oh my gosh, that's what's hard. When we're like, what do we do? Like, who's going to stay with that child? And we're over here like, let's go back inside.
I can recall one time when my shift was over, and this wasn't even my student. It was a student from another class, and they said, oh, she's not feeling well. She's got tummy issues. Can you just hold her while we call mom? Because they would have been out of ratio if she stayed in the classroom with the other teacher. So I was like, okay, I'll let her sit on my lap. And poor thing, she was like resting on my chest, and then all of a sudden she went, "What?" and she threw up right down my shirt.
Oh no.
And I was like, oh God, it's time for me to go home. I'm like, this child needs to go home. I need to go home. This day is over. But it's just so sad that we get put in those positions to where it's really hard when the child is sick. We have to take the child out, but then do we have enough teachers and adults to keep that ratio?
Yeah. And then throwing up, because I'm like, yeah, that should be a call.
Some say it has to be 3.
Yeah,
I'm like, why am I gonna wait for this child to throw
they're
up
like,
3
oh,
times?
just, you know, let's see, maybe just ate something, maybe they're just running, and I'm like, or like diarrhea. You know,
yeah.
I've had like babies that would like have like diarrhea. Like, I remember like changing them, put them on the changing table, and I thought, like, I was not thinking anything actually. I was just gonna change them, and I was like, oh no, they had diarrhea, and I'm like cleaning them. Come to find out, when I picked them up, it all got on my shirt.
Oh, yes.
And I was like, and I was a sub at this time. So I was like, can I go home?
Seriously.
And the lady, she was just kind of like, like, she didn't want me to, but then she was like, yeah.
I have learned over the years that as a teacher, especially if you're working with the infants, you need to make sure you have a change of clothes, either in the classroom or in the car, because they get messy. And whether they spit up or sometimes the diaper shifts and all of a sudden I've been peed on. Oh, there's just a lot of things that can happen. Little ones, we love them, but they're very, very messy, and we have to anticipate on that. And I think that's one of the reasons why every school should be having smocks for the teachers.
Yeah. So I think fever, you should go home right away.
As soon as they have a fever, because something's going on. That means their body is fighting something. Even if it's just the teething, they still would be better off at home than in the school, because they're going through something traumatic for them. It's painful to have those come in, and they need to be in their home environment for that.
Even when I feel like when they're 99, that's like at the verge, they're fighting something. And I'm like, yeah, I might check up on it again to see if it goes lower. But if it's the same thing, then they're getting something.
Yeah.
And fever is the most contagious. And I don't know about you, but if my child has a fever or a slight fever, I would like you to call me, because you're going to get all the other kids sick. And then I'm like, if your child was there with my child, I'm like, I wouldn't want my child to get sick.
Right.
But a lot of times schools, they wait. They wait to see if it's higher to 100 and something. I'm like,
not
I
only
don't
do they
like that.
wait, they also give this 24-hour grace period, which I absolutely cannot stand. Because how many of us are fully healed after one day of being sick? No. A lot of times you're going to feel worse the next day. And
yeah, your fever's probably gone, but there's something else probably not feeling good.
Right. So I don't like it when they say, oh, they have to be fever-free for 24 hours, because those parents, they will wait exactly to that 24-hour mark. If they were sent at 12 p.m. the day before, they're going to come in at lunchtime, 12 p.m. the next day, and expose our whole class again. And it is terrible, because they will come in as if they're okay because they're fully medicated, but they're not, and they're still spreading their germs even if it doesn't show that they're still feeling really sick.
And this is what I feel. Let's say we send them home at 9 and we're like, oh, we see that they have a fever. They go home around 9 or whatever. They'll bring them back at 9 and I'm like, were they fever? They stopped having a fever after 9? I don't believe that they had they probably were like, oh, that's what then we saw it. You need to keep checking up on it. So if they had a fever at 6 p.m. still that day, they could not come the next day.
But yeah, the parents will not tell us that because they want their child to come into school, and they're not thinking about exposure to the teachers and the other children. And that got really tricky when I was working at the hospital, because obviously they're nurses and they're doctors, they know about germs. But when it comes to their own child, they're like, I need to get to work. I'm going to give them medication. I'm going to bring them to school. And then when the medication wears off, I would call them and they say, oh, we thought we'd have more time. And I'm like, oh, that just burns me that they would do that. And then there's other parents that would come in and they'd see the symptoms of a child and be like, oh, look at the color of that mucus. They're fighting something. They should not be here. And I'm like, do you want to tell your coworker that? Because in our policy, it's okay at the moment, but I agree that this child should not be here. So it's really hard to say. Luckily, with COVID, it started to get a little bit better because people were more conscious of illness and worried about spreading germs. But I think now that it's been a while, it's starting to relax again.
Yeah. And what do you think? I feel like when I see green boogers, I feel like it's an infection.
If it's not white, there's something they're fighting.
Okay, because a lot of families, they tell me, oh, it's allergies. And I was like, I see as green boogers. They sound very congested.
If it's allergies and they're having green and yellow mucus, then it went past allergies into sinus infection.
Yeah, because I had a child that it was a lot of boogers. Like I think it was clear at one point, and then it got green, and then I noticed the cough, and then the child was like, my throat. And I was like, oh no, his throat, he probably has a sore throat.
Yeah.
And I let mom know. Mom's like, oh, he just has allergies. And then come to find out, she took him to Disneyland that night, and then she ended up not bringing him because she found out he had a fever. And then she thought he was going to be better, and then she told us, and she was like, oh, I took him to the doctors. He actually has a pneumonia.
Oh, my goodness.
And I'm like, not that I want to say told you, but I don't try to send children home just because. I always try to see, like, even if it's a little bit runny nose, green boogers, so you can do something at home to prevent it to get worse. That's the best time to prevent it to get worse. Maybe have your child over the weekend, like take more medicine or rest more or something because they're trying to fight something. Why wait until it gets worse where they're getting a fever and getting pneumonia? But I don't know, that's just me.
And a lot of times parents don't, and even teachers, they don't think much about children coughing, but that can be a very serious thing. If they're coughing a lot and they're eating at lunchtime or breakfast time, it can be a choking hazard, and that's liability on us. So we need to be careful with that. One time I had a girl that was having, she had chest issues, and they didn't realize that there was built phlegm in there. I think it was a bronchitis type of thing that was building up after a cold. And they just kept saying, oh, she's getting over the cold, she's getting over the cold. And I go, well, why is she choking on her food? And finally, they did take her to the doctor and found out that she was getting bronchitis, and it was building up phlegm within her chest and her esophagus tubes. So she was choking on her food, and that's very scary.
Now that makes me think, because I do have a child that she's always like throwing up, like just randomly. Like they could be eating and then she'll just start throwing up, or we'll be walking from the playground and she was fine and she just starts throwing up. Her parents told me it was because like if she gets a hair in her mouth. But then I was like, that's interesting. But I'm like, okay. Then I noticed they cut her hair, and I'm like, okay, that's probably why. But she was still doing it. Then they started putting her hair up. She's still doing it.
Yeah, sometimes we need to advocate for the child and talk to the parents through and be like, this seems like there's something going on. Doesn't hurt to get them checked.
Yeah. And we did talk to the parent. The parents like didn't say anything. That's just. But then I'm like, I feel like as a parent, I would probably push him and be like, there has to be something wrong. Why is she throwing up? And it wasn't like a little phlegm, or it wasn't, it was a lot, and it was like, and us, we couldn't tell, is she sick? Like, because that's something we would do. If a child's throwing up, you're going to send them home.
Yeah.
But then if they have, like, there's a reason why they're throwing up, maybe there's something that we can do, to help support them, especially when someone comes, like licensing or something. They're going to be like, why are they here? Why is it happening? And we're like, I don't know. And it's like, this is just what she does. And I'm like, that doesn't sound like a really good answer. Like,
we as teachers always have to think about the liability and what we're going to say to other parents if they see that, and what we're going to say to licensing if they see that as well, because it is a child that is in our care. And so it's our responsibility to know where they are in their health. And I understand that parents work and, sometimes they move to different states or different counties and they're far from their family. But there has to be somebody that can help, either a relative or a friend. You got to make sure that you have somebody, because children, they're a lot. And there's going to be times where either the father or the mother or a sibling, someone is going to need to step in and take care of them, because they're going to get sick. It's inevitable.
Yeah, for sure.
I wanted to find out about how we're feeling with a teacher getting a fever.
Oh, that's a good one, because I always question myself too, because sometimes I get sick and I'm like, and I even asked one time my supervisor, I'm like, I have a fever, so do I have to stay home for 24 hours? They told me that it's kind of like up to me of like, how do I feel can I show up or not? And I'm like, I'm not sure about that, because if I have the fever, isn't that like contagious? I could give it to other people.
Right. And I'm feeling like if I'm sick, one, I'm not going to have the full stamina that I usually do. Two, I'm going to be dragging and hating life, so I'm going to be a little bit more on edge than I usually would, more prone to being snappy and bringing in that negative climate that we were talking about before. And then I'm also going to be possibly spreading it to others. So personally, I think that teachers should follow the same policy of, if you have a fever, then you need to stay home. However, I do have a story to where I got in trouble for that. There was one time when I was working, and all of a sudden a baby that I usually could carry fine felt so heavy, and then all of a sudden my back started hurting, and I was just feeling so achy and weak. And then I started to feel hot, and I'm like, oh no, this feels like a flu. And I was perfectly fine in the morning. It was like right before I was going to go on my lunch, when I was feeding the other children and about to put them down for their nap, and that's when I was picking them up, and I'm like, ooh, why do they feel so heavy for me? So I took my temperature with the thermometer that we take with the children. Sure enough, it was 101. I picked up the phone, called my supervisor, and said, apparently I have a flu. I have a fever of 101. I'm feeling weak, and I need to send myself home. And she looked at me, well, she was on the phone, and she said, you're the closer today. You can't leave. And I said, do you want me to stay here when I have full-on flu symptoms? It's getting worse by the minute. I don't know what it's going to be like in a few hours. And then she said, well, you're going to go on your lunch. Aren't you going to be able to go to Vons? There was a Vons that was very close by. And she goes, can't you get some Tylenol or Dayquil? And I said, I can, but do you want me medicated being alone, since I'm the closer, with these children in the infant room? And she said, oh, maybe that doesn't sound very good. And I said, I don't want to take that risk. And then she said, okay, let me see what I could do. But then I got in trouble later on because I took the temperature in the room, and that was for the kids and not for the teachers.
Oh my gosh.
And they said we're not allowed to send ourselves home.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, if I'm not capable of picking up the children anymore, then I need to go home.
Yeah, there's been times like that. It's like, especially as a sub, you can't be sick. Like sometimes, like you don't know when you're gonna be sick or feel sick, and they're just kind of looking at you like, but we got you. Like, but who's gonna come support us? And I'm just like, I don't know. I didn't choose to be sick. Like, I don't know what to tell you. But I've had that where I was out of school and I was feeling sick, and I just feel like even more and more, and I'm like, I don't know. And I think I was a closer too at the time, and I asked like, can I go home? And the director tells me, well, can you give the other teachers all their breaks, and make sure all the breaks are done before? And I'm like,
I know.
Like, I get it. We need to, like, do the breaks and everything to make sure that's covered. But, like...
we are not super women. We get sick, too. And when the parents bring the kids sick, then we have more of a higher probability that we're going to get sick. And then it's just all bad because ratio is hard. It's a lot of times schools don't have any subs, so they combine classes, or the directors and the supervisors will step in. It gets really, really difficult, especially around this time with the holidays where teachers are on vacation, but then we still have flu season, so there's other teachers that are being sick, and staff goes really low, and it's just very hard to keep those ratios.
Yeah. I think I've been where a lot of teachers were out one time, and we have a whole bunch of children, and we're like, what do we do now? Like, I think one time I had like 3 classrooms in my classroom, which I know that was not allowed. And I'm like, what are we going to do? Because this is no. I had infants, my classroom, that were toddlers. They're 1.5, so they're like infant toddler. And then I had like the 2s in my classroom. And we were in the baby classroom, all of us. And I think I ended up having like, maybe like, I don't even know, probably 10 children at least in there. And I'm like, and I was by myself at the time.
Oh my goodness.
And it was so bad. I was like, what are we gonna do? But we figured it out. But I knew like at the time that was like not allowed. But yeah, so let's talk about policies on biting.
I wish there were more policies on this. A lot of schools don't anticipate that it's going to happen or realize that it can be such a big issue, because parents, they get upset when their child is bit. That's their little one, but
then when their child is the one biting, they're like, I don't know.
Yeah, that definitely does happen. And when is it too much? At one point, is it considered aggression? Because some schools will just allow it to happen and happen. At one of the schools that I worked at, there was an older infant. He was like 18 months. There was one day where there were 6 incidents of biting. The child bit 6 different times, 3 different children.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, how is he still here? This is not okay. And they just said, oh, it's the way that we're running the classroom, there's not enough supervision. I'm like, no, it's this one child.
And that's so hard when they always say like there's no supervision or you don't have supervision. I'm like, we cannot be with just that one child all the time, because what about the other children? And what about everything else that we have to do? There's so much that we have to do. It's not we're just with the children all the time. We still have to do our work. We still have our lesson plans that we have to follow, we still have to be like, okay, take them to the restroom, change their diapers, whatever classroom you're in, like serve them, you know, put them to sleep, things like that. We have so many things that we have to do. It's not just, we're just watching them.
Right. We're not just sitting around watching the children. There is a lot of things that need to be done, just like what you were describing. And also, if we're the only teacher in there doing it, we cannot be having everybody at arm's length. It doesn't work that way. So the parents need to work with us.
Especially in the toddler classroom. My class, they were 1.5, and I had a child that would bite a lot. But this is the time that they do, because they don't have much of their language, you know.
So there are some correct ways to approach a bite and some incorrect ways to approach a bite. And you have to know that parents are going to get defensive. So it's important to realize that going into it, and know that they're going to have intense reactions, both for the biter and the one that was bitten. Mostly for the one that was bitten. But it could get really scary when they happen to get the report at the same time, because we're supposed to keep it anonymous. But if the kids are getting picked up at the same time and they see the two reports, they put 2 and 2 together.
Yeah.
And it gets really sad, especially when it's like a tight community and the parents are friends.
And it's even harder when they actually start talking. Like in my class, they're preschoolers. They could tell. They could say, this person did it to me. And I'm like, I can't say any names, but...
Oh, yeah, I've had it where they said, oh, yeah, she did it again. She bit me too last week. I'm like, oh, no, please don't say that. But there's been times where the parents will see it and they're like, oh, your child bit my child. And it gets a little awkward, and we'll just have to say, it happens developmentally. They don't have the verbal skills. This is the way they communicate. They are learning that that's not the correct way for them to get a child to stop doing something.
Which is true. That's what they teach us, and it's very normal for the children to bite. The only time I feel is not really normal is when they start having that language already. They should be able to use their words, what they need and want.
Or if it's excessive, because sometimes then maybe there's something going on in their mouth where they feel like they have to clamp down on things, or maybe they're having a lot of anger within themselves and they're just having the clinch.
Yeah.
There's been times where I'm like, something's going on with that child, and it's beyond just learning the social skills, but they're communicating to us that something's not right, and they have this tense frustration within them. It's very important that the site supervisors and the directors, not only the teacher, meet with the parents and develop a plan, because you want to catch it quickly before you end up sending 6 ouch reports for one child in one day. That's just ridiculous. It should never happen. So when you start to see patterns of children biting and it's escalating, there needs to be a plan in place. And I really like Easter Seal's approach, where if it's 3 bites, then you need to speak to the parent and have an immediate parent conference. And if it continues after that with whatever plan that they put in place, then the child is actually dropped.
Oh, I thought they get like some support.
They will get support to a certain extent, but if it continues, then they will drop it.
I like that, because I've never been at a place where they had something like that. They just kind of were like, oh, let's just try to work with them. Let's try plan strategies. But sometimes, like, I have some education in, like in my bachelor's, master's, and just like other education experiences that I kind of personally know what to do. But other staff that I've worked with and co-teachers, they have no education on it. They don't know what to do. So I feel like they expect us to figure it out or, you know, deal with it. But then it's like, but how? You know, so to have that person on site to give them the support and find strategies and things like that is great, instead of being like, oh, and blaming the teachers all the time and saying, It's us and saying, you're not supervising the child. You could be changing a diaper, and
if you're the only one in the classroom, the child's going to go get another child, and there's nothing you can do about it but watch.
That has happened to me, but they told me that I had to have the child right by me while I was changing the child with a diaper.
That's still not going to stop it. What are you going to do? No, there's no way that could be prevented if you're the only staff in there. And that's one of my things is I don't feel like there ever should be just one teacher with infants and toddlers.
Yeah, and it was a lot like that. I've been to a lot of places, and they're like, well, you're in ratio, but...
Legally, yes, but best quality and best practices, no. There are two separate things. And thankfully, Head Start has recognized that, and they are really pushing for more of a 3-to-1 ratio.
And I think that they should start doing that now in every school. Like, my ratio is 8-to-1 where I'm at, which is pretty good. But now with children, like, we're seeing more with behaviors, is that even a good ratio anymore?
8-to-1 for preschool age, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking maybe even 1-to-6. There's been in many classrooms I've been in, there's multiple children with either ADHD, autism, or some type of behavioral, and it's very hard. So imagine you're in a classroom by yourself, and you have 8 children, and you have 2 girls fighting in the corner about a toy. You have another child that's running around the classroom because that's their need.
Yeah.
You have another child that is a biter, about to run and bite somebody. And then you have another child that is on the spectrum that likes to throw things. So you have a sensory table, and they're throwing the beans everywhere.
And they see
What
you
can
as
you do?
just having 8 children, but when you have all of those things, it really feels like you've got 12.
Yes. And they're like, then that means you can't manage a class. And sometimes it's not that way.
And honestly, nobody should be expected to manage a class like that. One of my partners right now, it's getting better because some of them are moving up. But at one point, out of a class of 9, they had 6 children that were on the spectrum.
Ooh.
That is scary. And 2 of them, well, not just on the autistic spectrum, but there was also one that was with Down syndrome. There was 2 of them that were non-mobile. So they had a lot of special needs. And some of them have ADDs, and some of them were autistic. And it is really hard. Even if you have just one child of each of those in the class, it makes it really, really hard. But to have all of those in one class, I can't imagine how stressful it is. I haven't even worked with it that stressful before, with not many special needs in one class. Have you?
No. No, I haven't.
Yeah, 6 out of 9. That's intense.
Yeah.
I've had 4 out of 16 though.
I think maybe I had like something like that, like 4. But the thing is, not like I can diagnose them. I just have the education to know, and sometimes like a lot of the families were understandably didn't want to accept that, that their child needs support. Which I always say there's nothing wrong if they need a little bit of support and things like that. But it's better to know how to support them.
Yes, and a lot of times we see the warning signs, but they're not even old enough to really be diagnosed anyway. And we can't even tell them to do the referral. There are times with early Head Start and early interventions where they can advocate for it, but they still hesitate to diagnose.
Yeah.
But that's the conversation for another time. We can go pretty long on that.
Yes. I'm like, I have like so many things in my head. But what kind of injury procedures have you seen in like the schools?
Head injuries are always serious. No matter what, don't hesitate.
Call right away.
To make sure that you call. There's one time where the poor child, he fell on a potter, like one of those plant potters, and he banged his head on the concrete and got a concussion.
Oh no.
And the supervisor actually hesitated to call 911 they were giving first aid, and the supervisor wanted to wait until the director came back. The director came back 20 minutes later, and that's when they called. That child could have died. I'm not even gonna lie. That child should have been in the ambulance already by the time the director got there. And it's really funny that we all got a big old meeting about it when it was the supervisor that dropped the ball. And they were saying any teacher can call at any point if a child is non-responsive and bump their head. But that should be a given. And that's something that preschools really need to talk about, is say, when do they need to call somebody higher up, and when do they have the right to protect the child in the moment.
Yeah.
And if you start to notice like the child's eyes are rolling back, or they're like going blah kind of a thing, and I have seen it once, you need to make sure that they get medical attention very, very quickly, because they're going unconscious, and more than likely they do have a concussion.
Yeah, so what we do whenever we see like head injuries, we call right away, and we have like an ouch report thing that we do to send home with the parents, so that they know that like they're aware about it and say that they got told. Other than that, we have when they get a scratch, bruise, cut, we do an injury report. But depending on the families, that's where you get to know the families. If a child even just falls, doesn't scratch or anything, sometimes parents would like to know.
And the thing is that, and this is again, I found out from working at a hospital, where the parents were saying sometimes it's not obvious right away. Sometimes you start to see signs hours after they actually
like
fell and hurt.
Yeah, I've had some families that are like, okay, they're fine. I don't like, they're fine. That I don't need to know. And then some families, they want to know everything.
And we don't want to keep it a secret, because then we're liable, not only the school, but us personally, because we are mandated to report things. And even like if you and I are in a teaching team, and I know that you saw it and you didn't share it with the parents, then I'm also liable. So we have to pay attention to those things of, you know, we're guilty by association.
Yes.
And understanding that teamness unit that we really do need to be working together, and understanding that we're liable together. So when we make decisions, we need to make sure that we're communicating with all of our team, because it could put us in a very awkward situation. Yeah,
even if you like possibly don't even know what to do, you're like, hey, what should I do in this, you know, but we should collaborate and to know what is going on or what to do, depending on what the situation is. You know?
If it's a very serious injury, then it makes sense for the preschool to call on themselves and tell licensing, because if the parent does it and the preschool didn't report it, it's worse.
Yeah, we had to do that not that long ago, because a child fell outside, and yeah, we don't want to sugarcoat the big injuries. You want to make sure that you're covering all bases. Even if nothing shows, you got to remember that there is a possibility of internal injuries. So you want to make sure that you're taking all the necessary steps for liability purposes. And that's something I always try to do, is like, if a child hurt themselves, they fell, they cried, it might not be like no mark, no nothing, but I like to tell the parents and communicate with them and say, oh, this happened, you know, please let me know if you see anything's developed or anything like bruises, cuts or anything, let me know, and things like that. I want to talk to them and know that they can tell me, because I'm like scared too. I'm like, let me know if something happened from, you know. Right. And with certain injuries, you don't want to move the child. It's best to just call the paramedics and have them come, because you don't want to further injure the child. And that's something that a lot of schools don't teach their teachers. I was fortunate to do that when I was at Laverne University and took my practicum at the Fairplex. Before I was able to do my practicum at the Fairplex, they gave me an orientation, and it was very thorough with these kind of policies.
where it said if a child falls, you don't want to move them because they could have a neck or a spinal injury. And that was new to me. I had already been a teacher for 10 years and didn't realize that was...
Like what, fallen? Like from high up or something?
Like fallen from the structure, the play structure outside.
That's why sometimes I've seen that a lot of schools either don't have it or it's very small, because I think of like injuries and things like that. They don't want to be liable for any of that.
Yeah. And I can understand it. I mean, it is definitely a risk.
They don't even have swings. At some schools I've seen they have swings, and now I don't think I've seen any that have swings anymore for preschoolers.
Yes. And that's because in the chains the fingers were getting stuck.
Is that why? Oh, I was thinking it was because of something with the pushing, because I remember being at a school when I was subbing, and they were telling me like, oh, you can't push the child, they have to do it themselves, because I think they were saying something about you don't want to be liable to be pushing the child and the child falls on your watch because you were pushing the child.
I could see that too. It's very tricky with that kind of stuff. Outdoor play is not a downtime for us. We are constantly thinking of different ways that children can accidentally get hurt all the time, because outside it's necessary, but there's a lot of risk.
Yeah. Like, and then you want them to play by themselves and not you. We're all observing, but we can't be always like right there, and that's what's hard, because if they're climbing on a play structure and they fall, I feel like you're looked up as you're not watching them properly.
And it only takes a second. There's one time where I was right in front of the child and he slipped and fell on the other side. I could have caught him if he fell towards me or towards the front, but he didn't. He fell on the opposite side. Luckily the child was okay. The parent was very sweet, but it was a very scary moment where I did more of a thorough check to see if there's any scrapes, bruises, and he did end up having like a bump on the back of his head. And they took him to the doctor, and he was okay. It turned out to be not too big of a fall, but that could have been really scary because there were metal poles, and luckily when he fell away from the metal poles.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we want to talk about with policies is if they have medication, particularly asthma, that's a big one, is if the teachers know how to administer it and if they're okay with doing it, and do they know how much. With the younger ones, it's like a face mask that has to be put on.
I've only seen that like once for one of my children. I've never had to use it. I'm like, thank God, because it's kind of scary.
It is, and I've done it a few times. I've gotten used to it with the little chamber and telling the child to take a deep breath. Also, sometimes when they have other medications, it's important to make sure that you have it locked up and away from the children. And all teachers need to know when it's administered and how to administer it. And I would say that directors and supervisors need to make sure that their staff is comfortable with it, because some are not comfortable. Like me, I don't like to work with Neosporin. It sounds kind of silly, but I'm allergic to it. So even if I have a glove on, I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to say, I'm sorry, somebody else has to administer the Neosporin. But if it's a child with asthma, that I'm used to. So I'll say, okay, I could do that. So that's part of the teaching team, is knowing what our comfort level is and why. We know we have our own reasons. There are times where children don't develop the safety senses. A lot of times with autistic children, they're just going to do what they're going to do, and they have no concept of cause and effect. They have no concept of what's about to happen. They're just in the moment, in their own world, not thinking about how they're going to hurt their peer or how they may hurt themselves. I've seen a child just throw a wooden block up above his head and not... He was 3 years old. The 3-year-olds usually know what goes up must come down, and if you throw it directly above you, it's going to come and hit you on the head. Well, this child didn't get that memo, and it hit him on the shoulder. And the funny thing is that it was with the supervisor in the classroom. I walked in coming back from my break, and I saw the block go up, and I kind of wish I had the freeze capability
Yeah.
to where I could freeze time and move it, because I knew what was about to happen. But there was no way I could stop it. And the supervisor just looked at me, and she mouthed, "Oh my God," and I just shook my head. Yep. In a way, I was relieved that she was able to experience it, because I've been explaining to her for months that this child has a very low sense of safety. He doesn't understand safety for himself or for his peers or even for his teachers.
Mm-hmm.
He actually bit a teacher too. He elbowed me in the stomach once. Yeah, well, I'm just gonna say that 3 teachers before he left was sent to workers' comp doctors because we had to get checked out, and I was one of them. Even though the directors and the site supervisors didn't want us to say that he was on the spectrum and showing every single sign severely on the autistic spectrum, and she was taking him to psychology therapy. And I said, he does need therapy, but he needs physical therapy and occupational therapy, because I'm sorry, I've tried to be as patient as possible, but your child shows every single sign of autism. Everything from the sensory, every time the toilet would flush, this child would scream. It was the sound that would trigger it. When we'd have fire drills, oh my God, he'd go running around like a chicken with his head cut off.
Oh no.
There were so many things. Very impulsive. He would hit, bite anybody in the classroom, whether it was a teacher or a child, it didn't matter. And it got to the point where the other children didn't want to play with him because they were worried he would come and throw something on him or smack them. They just knew to keep their distance.
So what do you do in that aspect with safety and them not having that?
It was really hard. Unfortunately, at that school, they didn't support doing DRDPs and didn't have regular parent conferences. And I think that's why it got as bad as it did, is because they didn't have those in place, and the parent was so blindsided by the time that I explained to her everything that was happening when he was 3 years old. We saw it when he was younger in the other classes, but the teachers were scared to talk to this parent because she was a nurse at a children's hospital. And then 2, they didn't really have the education. They were teachers with maybe their bachelor's, maybe their associates, and they didn't have that confidence to speak to somebody who has a master's degree. So they were a little intimidated by the parent. And the parent was a difficult parent, but she was one where if you tell her what the laws are and you tell her what the rules and procedures are, then she's gonna follow. You just had to be a little firm with her. There was one time where she said, "Why am I getting these ouch reports? I don't feel like I ever got this many before." And I said, "Well, this is our way of tracking that we are not liable for this. If the child comes in with this injury, it was not on our watch, and you cannot say that it was on our watch. If you would like to know more about those procedures, I can schedule in a time for you to speak with the supervisor." And she goes, "Oh no, that's fine, I was just asking." So when you say things like that, then she realizes, okay, this is something that's just best practice, and I'm not going to question it anymore.
Yeah, I feel like we really have to, when we have children like that, we have to support in any way. As a staff, what can we do? And try to work with the parents as best as we can. I know sometimes parents have a hard time accepting what is going on, whatever their child is doing, but we have to do it in a positive manner, because this is their baby, this is their life, you know what I mean? Like, they're gonna protect him no matter what, so we have to think of ways, how do we talk to them, how do we collaborate, how do we make them feel more comfortable so we can support their child. It's all for their child.
Yes, and at the same time, we have a duty to support and protect the other children that are in our class as well.
Yes, that's a big one, especially because if they're over here throwing things or like not even paying attention and throwing their bodies and things like that, like that's not protecting themselves, they're not protecting other children, because there's children everywhere.
And when it gets to the point where a teacher has to follow and shadow a child the entire time, that takes away one teacher at a ratio. And we don't have the manpower most of the time to do that. So it's not that we want to discriminate against the disability, but if we don't have the support for it, then we're doing a disjustice to not only that child, but to the other children in that class.
And this is why I always tell the families too that this is what we see, this is how we can support, this is what you can do. We can't do everything. It's too hard. Like, it's not like we're saying, no, we're not going to work with your child. But a lot of schools don't work with children with autism or ADHD or behavioral. To be honest, that's not what a lot of schools are. We work with everyone, which is a good thing. But we also don't have the tools to support them, because even if we know that they might be on the spectrum, we can't say that. The only way what we can do is talk to them, like with the DRDP's conferences, let them know where they're at and talk about what they can do.
Yes, and we gotta approach it from a way of supporting the family as a whole. Not just the parents, not just the child, but all of them all together. And saying, you know, this is what we see, this is what we recommend, this is what we suggest. And usually they can be receptive that way. But when the parent is not being receptive, and day after day after day after day, there is children constantly getting hurt, and then adults starting to get hurt as well, then it's not a safe environment anymore. Because the children realize it when the teachers are getting hurt as well, and then they start to feel insecure about the environment, because they're like, if they're doing that to the adult, what are they going to do to me? And that's something that the parents don't always understand. They feel like they're being attacked, but they don't see that we're trying to advocate for the entire class.
Yeah, and I even had parents where they would be like, I keep hearing about my child, only my child. But then I'm like, I'm not going to tell you about the other children.
Right.
they're not the sometimes they're not the only one that's having issues in the classroom. But I'm not going to say, I don't know, Johnny and did this today. Like, I'm not going to tell you about other children because of privacy reasons.
Exactly, and we have to be very careful with that too.
But I also always let them know, like, oh, this is the time where they learn, you know, this is very normal. They're still learning how to socialize with others. They might hit, they might bite, because they're still learning. But this is what we do to come support, and this is what you can do to support. But if you cannot also do, like, those tools or strategies I'm letting you know, then it's probably not going to work, because it has to work both ways. I'm going to do something at the school, but you need to do something at home. So
and that's why we get really frustrated when parents are not receptive, and then they don't want to work with the child, and we're at a loss at that point. We can't go any further, unfortunately. So that's where it would be nice if there were policies in place for site supervisors and directors to support the teachers better that way. And a lot of times they're just like, oh, maybe I'll give you more breaks, or, you know, have you tried these resources? Have you tried those resources? But after all of that, what do we do if it still persists and the parent's not open to doing the strategies at home? That's where it gets really difficult for us. And it's like, maybe this just isn't the right environment for the child.
Yeah. Well, I think mostly all schools, I think, that they have an open door policy. Where I'm at, we do. So we always encourage the families with any families. We tell them that they can come whenever, but especially those children that are having a hard time. We let them know, like, hey, maybe come help support, because we can't always be that person to support them. We still have to run our classroom and do whatever we got to do. So it is very hard to always redirect those children. So if you do come and support, that will help us. But also, we can show you what we do in the classroom. Maybe you can get some tips, or you can even show us some tips of what you do at home.
Right. Yes, it goes both ways. And, you know, always reminding the parent that they are the first teacher for their child, and that kind of empowers them to take a little more initiative. And it's okay for them to show us things, and then we can show them things. That's how this partnership should be.
Yeah. I think all the families and teachers have to come together to work for their child, because in the end, it's for their best interests.
Yes, and like the proverb, the African proverb says, it takes a village to raise a kid. And it really is, because it's not all on the parents and it's not all on the teachers. It's not all on the government. I mean, you can take it all the way through society. We all have our own obligations and responsibilities in helping the next generation become what they are. And sometimes that can be very heavy on teachers to have that responsibility. We are constantly reminded that we are shaping the future.
Yeah, we're also shaping this future, but you as parents are also helping them. We're also helping you and supporting you. We would like you guys to support us as well.
Yes, it is definitely a partnership. We hope this episode enlightened our listeners on how to build a teaching team that is prepared for ensuring culture of safety and transparent honesty with the parents. Thank you very much for listening.
So don't forget, be enchanted by education.